The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today we continue our conversation from an listener email from Sydney, Australia, who was asking about TikTok and the recent developments regarding laws that may ban TikTok in the United States. And as we were discussing it, we changed the conversation to Apple and the recent court filings by the United States Attorney General and 16 states in the United States against Apple for what they considered to be unfair business practices. So let's listen in. All right. So the next question was, isn't this a violation of free speech? And I'll add on to that. Isn't this the government getting overly involved in private business? I mean, let's face it. Now we have the Attorney General. We have the Attorney General of the United States and 16 states suing Apple.
Why?
Because they say that their practices do not promote competition. That once you get into an Apple phone, you are stuck with it because of they don't play nice with like Samsung. They don't play nice with the other platforms, and that is a violation of the antitrust monopoly clause.
So
that just actually came out 2 days ago.
Somebody has to say it out loud. But do we really want Apple to play nice with Samsung? Those devices are awful. Apple is nice and smooth, and it does interface with all of your Apple products. I'm obviously an Apple fan and an Apple user, but I touch a Samsung and I try to navigate a Samsung. I'm like, this isn't intuitive. You've added like 4 extra processes. I mean, we don't want Apple to interface with those tools. And if you know how to do your Apple correctly, there are plenty of those cross-platform apps that you can use. Like I can use Microsoft on my Apple products, and the world hasn't ended. So it's like, I don't know. I think, it bears saying that the reason Apple is as beloved as it is because people like Apple products, and those who like Apple products are not going to also buy Samsung.
Well, I can say that is an incorrect assumption. I have had an Apple phone for forever. And my bride saw one of these, the Samsung Flip. Very cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah, but that's the only cool thing about it is that it flips open.
Well, it has, you can actually do a lot from this screen here, from the short screen.
It's really fun seeing my reflection on that.
Yeah, she talked me into getting 2 of these because we call them the cool kid phones. And there was a huge learning curve from going from Apple to Samsung. But now we've had these maybe about 6 months, and now we're just as good with it as we were willing. I mean, there was a bit of a withdrawal period, where you picked up your phone and your hands shook because it was like something totally different. But it works just as good. You know what? The phone rings, it answers. You can answer the phone. It does all the stuff.
Okay, boomer.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it does all this stuff I guess I wanted to do. It doesn't do anything overly spectacular. My problem with Apple phones always was that there was, and I read this, was that they had a built-in program that after like 2 years, your battery wouldn't charge right. And it was like, okay, fine. But I will say that we did take a trip to New York City to go see the new grandson about 5 years ago. And when I got off the plane, my Apple phone was on fire. I was like walking through LaGuardia Airport and like my pants pocket was very hot, and I thought, "Uh-oh, what's going on here?" I pulled it out, and my Apple phone was on fire, and I was like, "Oh, that's not good." Um, so I actually had to, go into New York City and get a new phone, and I got another Apple, of course. But I mean, we're happy with the Samsung. It's okay. But again, why the United States Attorney General seems to think that this is, or the 16 states attorney generals that have signed on to it, why they think it's necessary.
Who are the
I,
16 states?
um, well, let me look that up.
So while you're looking, I just wanted to add, I've always used Apple phones, and but people who are younger than I, like my daughter and my son and his wife, and people they know, and other people who know a lot more about tech than I do, have all said, forget Apple, use Samsung. So I said, okay, well, the next phone I have to get, I'll get an Android. So, and as Mark said, big learning curve. I couldn't figure out how to do anything. So I had to give my phone to my granddaughter. And she set it all up for me. And I said, thank you very much, dear. And other things, I had to look up on YouTube how to do this and how to do that. And as Mark said, it's fine. I mean, it does what I need it to do, but it's not Microsoft compatible, and things that I would like it to be able to do, it will not, because the software from Apple will not transfer over. And that was one reason why my family members decided to go with Samsung, because they got really annoyed with Apple and its propensity simply to refuse to interface with everything else in its tightly held platform, and that it wasn't going to share. And they felt that was completely unfair business practice. And they weren't going to use its products anymore again at all, period. So they were born in 86, and my children were born in 86 and 91. So I'm not sure what generation that makes them.
Millennial. Peak millennial. Yeah, there's a 1990 to 1991 is apparently the largest population of millennials, and it's like the second largest living population in the United States.
Okay. Well, I'm the tail end of the boomer. I always thought I was the next. I always thought that the boomer ended the year before I was born, but apparently not. So I am the last boomer year.
You're the last boomer standing? You're the last boomer standing?
No, the last year of the baby boomer year.
Okay.
I always thought I was the next one. What was that, Gen X? Yeah, I always thought I was Gen X, and I was like, oh boy. But then I read the thing that said, oh no. And 1964 was the last year of the boomers, and I was like, oh man, that's not what I wanted.
Okay. All right. So the 16 different states, they really don't. I mean, they just say 16 states. They do not spell it out. It was filed in New Jersey. Group of attorneys general includes California, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and that's about all they describe out as to, I guess those are the big ones, but also Europe. Europe is also suing Apple. Of course, they've done that a lot. They've sued Google. They've sued Yahoo. Heck, they sue just about everybody over there. Especially
somebody's got to hold the Americans accountable.
Well, yeah,
we're not very good about doing it ourselves, so it's good.
No, we're really bad
for us.
Yeah. Apple's argument is, at Apple, we innovate every day to make technology people love. Designing products that work seamlessly together, protect people's privacy and security, and create a magical experience for our users.
Okay.
The lawsuit threatens who we are and the principles that set Apple products apart in fiercely competitive markets. That's end of quote. And that is exactly what the EU and these 16 states and the Attorney General of the United States is saying is the problem. And they reference the fact that Apple Messenger will not integrate with anything else.
Okay, that part's true and a little bit annoying.
It's massively annoying.
Well, I don't know that it's massively annoying. I just think it's a little bit annoying. So like when you're in a group text, Apple, if you're doing Apple to Apple, it's like a blue message, and then you can have like a lot of extra features attached to it. But if you're not Apple to Apple, it's like a green text, and you don't get all the same features. But it's not because, I wouldn't say it's only because Apple's not playing nice in the sandbox box. I would also argue that Google's not playing nice with Apple either. It's a two-way street because Google could plus their messaging. I think what it is because it's the difference between the fact that it's an Apple Messenger versus a text messaging app.
Right.
An Apple Messenger is, meant to integrate across the Apple platform, across FaceTime. Like it's part of this broader ecosystem. That if you keep a text message separate from your video message, like Google doesn't even have a good comparison to FaceTime. So you have to download.
No, they don't.
You have to download another app.
WhatsApp.
And WhatsApp, or dinosaurs could still use Skype. It is possible now as a FaceTime user for me to generate a FaceTime link that I can send to a Samsung phone, and then they can come meet me. And it's in like a FaceTime-esque space. So we can still now share in a way that we couldn't do before. The video quality is not as good because you're having to essentially piggyback your way around the network, but that's an Apple feature. So Apple is making it, more possible to have that integration.
Yeah.
I don't see Google doing that.
No. I again, it's obvious that Priscilla is an Apple fan, and that's perfectly fine. Because again, like I said, I was for a very long time. I had Apple phones. Of course, I also have to admit, back when they came out, cell phones really started to become more available. Motorola had back then some of the best, showing what a dinosaur I am. Motorola had those absolutely great phones that were out there. Of course, that's back in a time where there were multiple different providers of cell phone service. Now it's down to about 3 or 4 big ones, and that's about it. So yeah, I mean, the idea of Apple being sued for not playing nicely in the sandbox, yeah, you could say the same about pretty much any platform whatsoever. Why would you develop it to just give it away to somebody else? I mean, it just seems to be like anti-business practice. If Google wants an in, then they have to work a little bit harder to make apps that are more what people want. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't have the law come in and say, well, what they're doing, you can't punish Apple for doing so well, which is, personally, I see that as exactly what is happening here. I admit, I like my Samsung phone, absolutely do. But there's a lot of things Samsung could do with the iOS platform to make it better. And just getting Apple to share their stuff with them, I mean, to me, that's exactly what we complain about the Chinese when we say we take technology over to them, and then they have to be given the right to the technology, to the intellectual property, before they'll work with it. And that is one of the huge arguments that we have against, doing business with the Chinese, is they steal that intellectual property. Well, this isn't stealing it, but this is getting the law to take it away. So I think that that's one of the issues that we're looking at here when it comes to Apple.
Well, and you mentioned WhatsApp, and this is kind of where I think some of the TikTok stuff starts to get a bit gnarly. Like WhatsApp, I know what has been is like popular around the world. It a few years ago now was bought by Meta, and Meta is Facebook, it's Instagram, it's WhatsApp. It's now they just launched Threads, which is like their version of Twitter, and the company of Meta is getting increasingly up in our business. Like if you go to a place like a website to create an account, you have the opportunity of using your Facebook login to create the account. Now they say, you're giving permission and we're going to protect your information, but are you really? So it's like when I hear these like, let's ban TikTok as a national security measure, it's like, why aren't you looking at the other pieces too? Like it's complex, but it's like you're going after this one thing, again, because you're puffing your chest and you need something to go after, and allowing, despite all the times that Zuckerberg has been in front of Congress, allowing these other things to go on.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's American. Well, what I was right. So he's a good guy. But if the other man is from Singapore, Singapore is separate from China, and apparently, as you say, Mark, there's an inability. Well, I think it's a deliberate obfuscation on the parts of Republicans. They want to, as you say, they're creating an enemy, and
well, let's hope. Let's hope that's the case. Let's hope they're not that stupid. But yes, go ahead.
Well, they may very well be that stupid or that obtuse. They've got a focus. This is like Hunter Biden's laptop, and nobody wants to look at Jared Kushner and his $2 billion because they're laser focused on Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's laptop. And that's got to be, it's the tunnel vision thing. And now that we're moving on to this poor man from Singapore, and he's got to be Chinese, even though he's from Singapore. He's got to be Chinese somehow. And we're going to contort ourselves into as many pretzel positions as possible until people are positive that he's from China, even though he's from Singapore, and I'm sure can prove it. That's not going to matter. All that is fake somehow. And, it's like legerdemain, and keep people's attention on this person and his business and the danger to the American public. In the meantime, there's a lot more that we need to be concerned about.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.